Hey friends, welcome back to Acre Homestead. Today we're going to sit down and just chat. We are going to do a Q&A. I haven't done one of these in over a year and I thought it would be fun just to sit down and kind of have a conversation. I got a lot of questions. I asked some questions on the community tab on YouTube and also on my Instagram. I want to say thank you to everyone who offered up a question, and I am not going to answer every single one. There were quite a few repeat ones, so I kind of put them into categories and I tried to choose the ones that were the most common questions, but there are still a lot, and so this might be a long video. So if you have things to do around your house, laundry, cooking, dishes, you can put some ear pods in or whatever it might be and get those things done, and we can just hang out together. I did organize the questions into categories, so I can put timestamps for the different categories if you're more interested in one category versus another category. So the order we're going to go in is family, personal, and self-care. Kind of get to know me, a little bit of background, a little bit about me and Josh, and some self-care things that I do. There is a baby section where we're going to talk about a lot of questions about the baby. I got a lot of questions about YouTube in general, so I thought that would be fun to kind of go into those questions as well. We've got garden/homestead questions, food preservation, and the last one is going to be cooking questions. So that's kind of the order we're going to go in. We're just going to dive in and we're going to get right into it. So Bonnie asks, I'd love to hear more about your childhood. And so I thought I would just give a little bit of information about my background. I'm the youngest of 4. I have 2 older sisters and an older brother. I was homeschooled. I lived in the same house for 23 years. As I was going to college, I lived at home to save money so that I could get through college debt-free. I worked the entire time I went to college, and I graduated with a degree in dental hygiene. And so that's a little bit about me. A little bit about Josh is Josh has lived in over 27 homes. He's lived in over 13 states, and he moved around a lot. So kind of the complete opposite of the way that I grew up versus the way that he grew up. And so that's one reason we're pretty excited to have a home that we're going to call home for quite some time. And we're going to really dig in and put some roots there. Dana asks, what is your go-to podcast or music or genre to listen to while you're cooking? So you all know I love to have AirPods in or headphones in, and I love listening to stuff while I get stuff done around my house. And I listen to mostly country music. I love piano/violin music, and those are kind of my 2 favorite music genres. I also really like late 2000 hits because I graduated high school in 2008, and so those are really great for me. If I'm not in a very good mood, put some of that music in and dance around the house. I love to dance. But what I listen to more than that are podcasts. I love true crime, and I also really love listening to memoirs and biographies. The reason I love listening to nonfiction books or audiobooks is because I feel like I can learn a lot from other people's experiences. You know, I grew up very, the way that I grew up and the way I know, and I've just learned that as I listen to other people's stories and backgrounds from all different walks of life, it really opens your mind, and you can really get a better understanding for where different people are coming from with different backgrounds. And it just helped me become, I feel like, a better person, because I feel like I can I understand that we didn't all grow up the same, we didn't all have the same experiences, and you can just kind of appreciate people for who they are because you understand that everyone's background is so different. And so that's why I love memoirs and biographies, and I feel like it makes me a better person learning different people's stories. Emily asks, what do I do to relax? I love reality TV. And so that is what I do to relax. I love anything on Bravo almost. It is definitely a guilty pleasure. And that is what I love to do, is watch those. I feel like I can just zone out and put my brain into something else and just really enjoy that. So that is something I like to do to relax. I obviously like to get into the garden and get in a zone and weed. I love to cook. You guys see a lot of what I love to do, but the one thing that the one thing that I don't really show is that I do like to watch reality TV. And I love to go to the pool and lay by the pool. That's another thing I love to do. Jean asks, what does Josh do for work? Josh is a computer programmer, and that is what he does for work. A lot of people asked if Josh works outside the home, and he does. He has a 9-to-5 job, and he works more than 40 hours a week doing that, and he's really, really good at what he does. Katie asks, how did Josh and you meet, and what is our love story? So Josh and I met online. We met on Match.com. This was back before dating online was super, super popular, back when you had to pay for it. Now all the apps are free, but there weren't really any dating app. I think Tinder had come out the year we met, but it wasn't like it wasn't something that people used. So we met on Match.com back when you had to pay a monthly subscription to do that. And we talked online for about a month and a half before we actually met for our first date. And our first date was at a Hawaiian restaurant, and it was absolutely delicious. And he made me laugh the entire time. We went on a date on, I think it was Saturday, and it was a holiday weekend. So then we went out on our second date on Monday, and the rest is history. I knew on the third date that he was the one because I just laughed the entire time. He's super, super funny. He's super punny, and yeah, he's great. So that's how we met. We met online. Gina asks, would you like to be a stay-at-home mom? And I will be a work-at-home mom because YouTube is my full-time job. That is a question that comes later if I still do dental hygiene, and I currently am no longer a dental hygienist. That is what I went to college for, but last October, my full-time job is to hang out with you, and I wouldn't want it any other way. I absolutely love what I get to do. I think that I'm completely honored and blessed that this is what I get to do for my career now, is hang out with you. And I continue to do that after I have the baby, so I will be a work-at-home mom. Gina asks if we are going to homeschool or if we are going to public school. And at this point, I would probably say they will go to school. We will not homeschool, but I want to look at each individual child as an individual person, a whole being, and seeing what their needs are. I don't want to just say, oh, we're going to do this or do that, because I don't really know at this point. And so at this point, I would probably say they will go to school, but I won't know totally until it comes to that point. We're talking 6 years from now, and that's a long time, and a lot of things can change, so we will just have to see what happens. Antoinette asks, you mentioned about getting financially stable. I'm interested in some information/tips on that. What styles, rules do you and Josh set so that you could achieve your financial goals? When Josh and I were dating, we actually took Dave Ramsey's class. I think it's called Financial Peace University together. I had taken it in high school, and I learned a lot about it. My parents are very big Dave Ramsey fans, and so it was something that we talked a lot about growing up. And so when Josh and I were dating and realized that we were pretty serious, we thought it would be a really good idea to take the class together. Now, do we follow every single thing that Dave Ramsey says? No, but even if you pick about 50% of his kind of guidelines and you go by that, you're going to be really well set. And so that is something that we have implemented into our budgeting system. And if you want to know about a good way to budget, definitely Dave Ramsey has a lot of free resources online. You can listen to his podcast, and he's got a YouTube channel, and he talks about the debt snowball and putting money into retirement and paying cash for things, and those are all things that I think are really good. I'm really passionate about being debt free and trying to be as financially stable as possible. And so that is kind of what Josh and I have used to help us get on the same page. And like I said, we don't follow every single one of Dave Ramsey's baby steps or rules, but we do follow quite a bit of them, and we think that he is fantastic. Karen asks, how old are you and Josh? And how do you like living in the Northwest or the Pacific Northwest? What is your favorite part of living in the Pacific Northwest? And Josh and I are both in our early 30s, and we love living in the Pacific Northwest. Now, I've only ever lived in the Portland metro area. Portland, Oregon is where I grew up, and now I do live in Washington, but we're kind of in that Portland metro area, just across the river. And Josh has grown up all over. Like I said, he's lived in 13 different states, I think, and the Pacific Northwest is a pretty awesome place to be. My entire family, except for one of my siblings, lives here, and Josh's entire family, except for one of his siblings, lives here, and she probably will be moving back. And family is super, super important to us. And so there will be no reason we will be moving because we enjoy being close to family. You guys see us working together a lot. And I help my parents help us. You see my sister-in-law and my mother-in-law, and we help each other out a ton. I help them out, and we work really well together as a family. And so there's no reason why we would move. That is one of the best things. Also, the weather in the Pacific Northwest is pretty awesome. It's pretty mild. The average low, I think, in the winter is 34 degrees. And so we do have days, obviously, that get colder. And the average high is typically, I think it's like 79. And so we're very temperate climate. Now this last week we have 3 days of 100 plus, and that's pretty rare for us, or it's pretty typical for us to only have about a week or two where we're in the hundreds, and then usually in the summer we're at about, in the mid 80s, and we're very, very dry and not humid in the summer, which is something I like. And we usually only get about 3 days of snow on average a year, so we get to enjoy a little bit of snow, but we're not shoveling snow all the time. So in Portland, we have 144 days on average of sunny days, so overcast is something that we have, but for all the other things, I really like it where we live. So we will be here for a really long, long time. J.M. Woods asks, what was your parents' and Josh's parents' reaction to the news of the baby? And they were very, very excited. They both yelled and my mom jumped up and down. So I'm the youngest of my siblings, and they're all done having kids, and they had basically written Josh and I off that we weren't gonna have kids because we've been married for over almost 8 years. And so they were pretty excited that there is going to be another grandbaby on their side of the family. And so that's pretty exciting. And then Josh's family was very excited as well. One of my sister-in-laws just had a baby, and my other sister-in-law is pregnant, and so all of these babies are going to be really close in age, which is going to be pretty cool to have cousins that are going to be around the same age that all live together. That's something I didn't grow up with. My grandparents lived far away when I was growing up, and my cousins are all way older than me, and so it's pretty exciting that the cousins are going to be close in age and live really close to each other. Ryan asks, do I ever sit down? And I do. I just don't film when I'm sitting down because that would be really, really boring to watch. So what I do is I do take days off where I do absolutely nothing, just like yesterday. Yesterday, I literally did nothing productive except for rest, which is being productive, because if you don't rest, then you're gonna get burnt out, and that's not gonna be healthy or good. And so yesterday I laid around the house, I watched TV, I puttered, I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything productive except rest, and that was good. And so just know that I do take time to rest and relax. I just don't film it because no one wants to see me in my sweatpants watching TV, because that would be boring. So that is that section. So we're gonna move on to baby questions, which I kind of answered a few of them in that. So I didn't organize them absolutely perfectly. Michaela asks, will your near future plans with regards to setting up your garden/homestead change now that I am pregnant? Nope. Don't have any plans to change my plans. My plans to put in the garden and move forward with that is 100% on track. That might be naive to think that I'm going to be able to get all my plans done, but I plan to get all my plans done. So we'll just see together if that comes to fruition or not. And you guys will see that we are just in the beginning phases of planning the new garden. You will watch me build that out 100%. You'll be there along the journey. Basically, when we're putting this garden to bed here in the fall, we are going to be starting building the new garden, and so that hopefully in the spring we're going to be able to plant. So I'm pretty excited about that. Wendy asks, have you thought about a home birth or hospital birth? And yes, I have thought about that. And I love the idea of a home birth. I love the idea of being in my own space, being in control of the environment and all of that. But I am planning to do a hospital birth because I do plan to, my plan is not to necessarily have a plan. My plan is to have a healthy baby and a healthy me, and whatever way that looks, whatever happens, happens. I think all birth is natural. So if I have to have a C-section, that's natural. If I need to be medicated, that's natural to me. It's just whatever needs to happen in order for me and baby to be healthy. That's my plan. I want to put no expectations on myself to have a very rigid plan in my head so that if it doesn't go the way that I planned, that I'm going to be disappointed or upset about that. I want to have no expectations on myself, and I want to have no expectations on Josh. So my plan is to have the baby in the hospital so that all the options are available for me. I could get an epidural if I want, I could do nitrous if I want, or I could do it unmedicated, but I have those options available to me, versus if I try to do it at home for my first one, then all those options are not available to me. And I have no expectations of trying to do it one way or the other. And I just want to put no pressure or expectations on myself. So that is why I'm choosing to do it in a hospital. But I do see the beauty and the appeal of doing it at home. I just don't think that's the right choice for me for this baby. So that is what it is. And I think that it's beautiful that we have all these options available to us in the time of era that we live in, versus, you know, before there was only one option and now we have multiple options, and I'm totally willing to take advantage of all the options that are available to me. Brooklyn asks, how many kids do you plan on having? I have no idea. We're taking this one day at a time. This has been pretty difficult being pregnant. I have so much respect for women now, and morning sickness has not gone away. And it actually now is morphed more into like afternoon sickness, and tiredness is a real thing. And so we're just taking this one step at a time. We have no, just like I don't have any expectations of how I want the birth to go, I have no expectations of what my family size should or shouldn't look like. So we're just excited that we're focusing on baby number one. Catherine asks, have you given any thoughts on what the nursery will look like? Not so much. I do know that I want it to be neutral. I don't want it really to be themed, and I want it to be very, very minimal. So one thing I'm working on right now as we're getting transitioned to moving is I'm purging and getting rid of a lot of stuff. I've always kind of had more of a lean toward minimalism, and over the last 2 years living here, with the way that my life has gone, I have not had a chance to really purge things and get rid of things. And I sometimes watch these videos on, you know, all the things you need for newborns, and it's overwhelming and stressful to me to think of all the things that you need. And so my plan is to be very, very, very minimal. I don't want a bunch of stuff. I don't feel like I want a big nursery that's packed full of a bunch of furniture and things. But like I said, I don't know what I'm doing here, and so that might be naive, but my plan is for it to just be really, really, really minimal. So we'll see how it goes. And a really, really common question, will I be making baby food? And I'm sure I will. I don't know if I'm going to be canning it. The way that my mom did it made a lot of sense. Is she didn't really make special baby food. Basically whatever they were eating, we ate. She's always said there was something that you could cut up small enough or whatever. And I also read this book a long time ago. It was super interesting. It was about how the French introduce foods to their kids, and there's no such thing as like kid food versus adult food. It's just everyone eats food. And I think that's probably what we'll do, where I won't take the time to make like special food. It'll just be whatever we're eating can be made into whatever they eat, I guess. I don't know. But again, I don't really know what I'm doing. This is the first time I'm even having these thoughts in my head, and so we'll see how it goes. Keely asks, how much do you think home education has shaped the way you think and do things, and will you home educate? So this kind of goes back, I guess, to the earlier question, will we homeschool? And I think that the way that home education shaped the way I do things is it allowed me to have a lot of time to do things like cooking and all that stuff, and that's where I really got the passion for it, because I was homeschooled and I had a lot of time on my hands. And one thing that me and my friends did to occupy our time was we would cook and we would go to the library and find cookbooks and then come home and try to cook those recipes. So I think that it allowed me to have time to do those types of things. But like I said, I don't know what we're gonna do in the future. Now, I loved the ability to have all that time to explore my passions while being homeschooled, but I also did love going to school. I went to school my junior and senior year of high school, and that was super crucial for me. I loved it. I thrived in that environment, and I'm super grateful that I had the opportunity to do that. I don't know if I would have been totally ready for college if I hadn't have gone to the school that I went to. It was a private school that was very, very academically rigorous, and it definitely prepared me for college. I have some pretty serious learning disabilities that I have overcome. I'm extremely dyslexic, and I couldn't really read honestly until high school. So I don't know if, it's hard to say if I would have even thrived in a school environment when I was younger because of that. I have no idea, but I know that after I kind of was able to overcome some of those learning and reading disability problems, that I was able to go to school and get the study skills I needed and the test taking skills I needed and the essay writing skills I needed in order to go to college and thrive in college. I did get a 4.0 in college, and it's not because I'm the smartest person in the room, but I was able to get those study skills I needed, and I think that's half of the battle of going to school is, do you know how to study? And I knew I got those skills, I knew how to study, and I was able to get good grades. I think that the way it worked out for me was a really good way that it worked out because of that. So that is the baby questions. Oh, another question I got a lot was, do we know the gender and are we gonna share the gender? And we do know the gender and we will share the gender, I just don't know when. I don't know why we haven't said anything about it, but we're just kind of enjoying knowing it. And we are throwing some names around. We probably won't say the name until the baby is born, but it is kind of nice knowing the gender. I feel like you can get a little bit more connected with your baby, or at least I feel a little bit more connected knowing the gender and being able to kind of come up with names and start visualizing those names with that baby. So that's pretty exciting. So now let's move on to the YouTube questions. I thought these questions were so fun, and I was just blown away by all the YouTube questions. I think that's super exciting. Cherie asks, how does Josh feel about your YouTube career? And how does your family feel about being featured in your videos? So the first question there is, how does Josh feel about your YouTube career? And he is so supportive. He believed in me well before I believed in myself. He was super supportive. It was really cool to watch him be so supportive with this, and he just thinks it's fantastic. And the other question was, how does my family feel about being featured in the videos? And the only people that I show are the people that are okay being filmed. I 100% respect everyone's comfort level. This is my thing, and I do not expect anybody who is not comfortable being filmed to be on film. So the people you see in my videos are the ones that are totally cool with it and totally on board. But before I ever film anybody, I always ask and get their consent and permission to make sure that they are comfortable being filmed, because it is not, I don't want to ever put any pressure on someone to feel like, oh, Becky's coming around with a camera and now there's going to be a camera in my face. So when I told my family, because we told all of our family about the baby, I didn't record that because I know that half the people in that room are not comfortable being on YouTube, and that is totally okay with me. I 100% respect everybody's comfort level. I do not ever want my YouTube to become in the way of any sort of family anything, and so if someone's comfortable being on it, awesome, and if they're not, awesome. I'm totally okay with that. And then the other question is, will baby be featured in the videos, and is my channel going to turn into a family vlog channel? My channel is going to stay the same. It's going to be a lot of cooking, a lot of gardening, a lot of food prep, and just like my family has the ability to consent or not consent, or my friends have the ability to consent or not consent on being the videos, baby does not have that ability to consent or not consent. So probably baby will not be in videos being featured a lot, because it's not their choice to be on YouTube, it's my choice to be on YouTube. And you know, Josh wasn't comfortable being on YouTube for a very long time, and that was totally okay. And even now sometimes he says, I don't want to be filmed, and that is okay. And I don't want to put someone in the position that can't consent to something to be on film. So as of now, the channel will stay pretty much exactly the same. I'll share my experiences, like birth story and all that stuff, but that's kind of where I think it'll end, because it's not baby's decision to be on YouTube. It's my decision to be on YouTube, if that makes sense. Sandy asks, did you keep your hygiene license even though you're not practicing anymore? Yes, I still have my hygiene license. I still keep up with all my continuing ed, and I actually just paid to renew my dental hygiene license this last month. I worked really hard for that career, and so I plan to keep that just in case as a backup. I don't think it hurts to continue to keep my license up. It doesn't hurt to continue to learn, take the CEs, continuing education, and just have that as something that's an option. Kelly Bell asks, what is your favorite type of video to make? Cooking, gardening, day in the life, etc. I'm sure some are harder to film than others. I would love to hear challenges you face with the different types of videos. I thought this was a really interesting question. There's kind of like differences when it comes to the videos, which ones are easier and which ones are harder. Some of them are easier to film, like days in the life are easier to film because I'm just taking you along with me during my day. But for some reason, they're harder for me to edit because there's a lot more moving parts and pieces versus a cooking video. That might be harder to film because I'm not only, there's a lot of things going on and I want to make sure I'm not burning stuff. And I mean, I still do, you see that. But they're a lot easier for me to edit because they're pretty linear. They go in one direction. And so I enjoy doing them all for different reasons because some are easier and some are harder depending on what aspect you're talking about, whether it's the filming part or the editing part. Marcia asks, do you ever save bloopers? I really enjoyed the war between you and the nail gun so much the other day and the facial expressions. Maybe in your spare time, make a blooper video. So happy for you and Josh. I don't save my bloopers. I just usually keep all that stuff in the videos. If I open my refrigerator and I break a shelf, which I did in one of the freezer cooking videos, I keep that in there. It's just, I keep kind of, if I burn something, I keep it in there. And that just happened to be a really funny one. It was making myself laugh when I was editing it. And so I left it in there. So I just generally, I wouldn't have enough to save because I usually just leave them in my videos. And she also asks, any advice on starting a YouTube channel? My advice would be to just go ahead and start. The best time to start is now. It's kind of awkward at first, and the only way you're going to get more comfortable with it is the more you do it. There's a lot of things to learn when it comes to it, between the filming and the editing, and it was super clunky and hard at first, but you're only going to get more comfortable the more you do it. I started with an iPhone 7 on my husband's old laptop using iMovie because it's free movie editor, and I just worked on trying to be 1% better with each video. And if you go back and watch some of my first videos, they are rough. And even still, I mess up on editing sometimes, and that's okay. And just be yourself. 100%, that was one thing that I realized right off the bat. I couldn't pretend to be anybody for any length of time, so the only person I could be was me, and really embrace who you are and just be yourself, because that's the only person you can be, and people will connect more if you're more real and raw. So my advice would be just get started and be you. Emma A asks, what is it like having YouTube as a full-time job now? Do you ever miss your old job, and what do you miss about it? It is the best job in the world, but it is also a very difficult job because I am my own boss. There's no one telling me to show up and do it. There's no one telling me what to do, when to do it, and so I have to be very self-motivated in order to do it. And that is the best part, and that can be the worst part. And you never work harder for anybody than you work for yourself. The things that I do miss sometimes is when you are a dental hygienist, when you walk out that door, you are done for the day. There is no thinking about work. It is done. Versus when you work for yourself, you really have to learn the work-life balance, which is very difficult sometimes, but also one of the best things you can do. And there is a lot of pressure because I now am responsible for, my own medical, and I am responsible for my own retirement, and I am responsible to pay my own taxes. And so things like that are part of the challenging part of kind of owning your own business, but it's also what gives you the flexibility to have time freedom. Because like I said, yesterday was Wednesday and I was tired and didn't feel good, and I was able to take the day off. So there's definitely pros and cons. For me, the pros definitely outweigh the cons, and it's super, super fun. Pamela asks, how long had you thought about starting a YouTube channel before you actually did, or did you start it on a whim? YouTube was something I had thought about for a long time, but not seriously. But then when 2020 hit and everything shut down as a dental hygienist, I lost my job. and I was off for a little bit. And so June 2020, I thought, you know what, I think I'm gonna make a YouTube video, and it was a garden tour video. And I filmed it, and I edited it, and I put it on YouTube. It is still on YouTube. It's the very, very first video I ever posted on YouTube. And then we had to go back to work, and it was very, very emotional going back to work at that time in the medical field. Dental hygiene was rated one of the most dangerous jobs to be in because you're creating aerosols and you're working very close to people, and there were still so many question marks about what was happening. And so it was a very, very mentally challenging going back to work at that time. And so the idea of continuing to do YouTube was not something that was feasible. I just could not wrap my brain around both. So then I didn't do it for a long time. And then I was starting my garden seeds January 2021. And as I was sitting there thinking about starting my seeds, I was thinking, I regret not continuing to document what I had done the year before, because 2020 was my first garden, and I didn't know when I started things. I didn't know what I started, and I had no records because I do not write things down. And so at that time I thought, you know what, I'm gonna start this because I want record for myself to know what is happening in my garden and when I did things and what I did. And that's when I committed to myself. I put my intro video up, and after that day I committed to putting 3 videos up on YouTube a week. And that's what I did, and I'm so grateful I did that, because if you watch the garlic harvest video, I was able to go back and see what I planted and when I planted, and I had that information. And that was one of the #1 reasons I started it, was for my own record keeping, not knowing that the best part was going to be to build this beautiful community and learn from you and be able to hang out with you. And I've just been so blown away by all of your guys' support. And that's how it started, and I'm so grateful that by you showing up, I get to continue to do this. Organic Garden Mama asks, how did I get into gardening and homesteading? I got into it because I love really good food. And the best way you can have the best quality food is to grow it yourself or to buy it local from a farmer. There were 2 books that were absolutely pivotal and super inspiring, and what really drove me to want to do this. One of them was Animal Vegetable Miracle. I've talked about this book before, by Barbara Kilsauver. I can link it down below. And The Dirty Life by Kristen Kimball. Both of these authors, they're true books. They are memoirs, and the way that they talk about food is the most beautiful and inspiring thing you will ever read. And that is what got me into buying local, wanting to grow my own food, and it was just super inspiring to read those books. And I also found a YouTube channel. This was when I first started watching YouTube a long time ago. She was the very first person I ever subscribed to, and sadly she doesn't make videos anymore, but all of her videos are still up on YouTube, and that is Esther Emery, and her YouTube channel is called Fauchmatic Off Grid. And she's actually the daughter of Carla Emery, and Carla Emery wrote a very famous homesteading book called the Encyclopedia of Country Living back in the 70s, when kind of the back to the land movement was going on. And it's still a very prevalent book in this community. And the way that Esther talks about and showed her gardens and food and slow living and all of that was just super beautiful and inspiring to me. And so that's kind of, those 3 people were the people that kind of got me hooked on this idea. But it really started just because I really enjoy eating really good food, and the best food you're ever gonna have is food that comes out of your garden or your backyard. Hope asks, what is my favorite thing to harvest? And hands down, potatoes are probably my favorite thing to harvest. It is like a treasure hunt, and I love digging out potatoes, and I like harvesting carrots too for that same reason. Basically any root crop where you don't know what you're getting until you dig it out of the ground is pretty exciting. Emma asks, how did you learn to garden? What to plant, when to fertilize, etc.? Did you watch a lot of YouTube for each individual crops before you planted them? And I don't really watch or research each individual crop. I just watched a lot of YouTube, and the biggest thing is just to get things in the ground. And that's kind of my method. I don't necessarily research every single crop to the nth degree. I definitely have researched some more than others, like tomatoes and onions. But with all the research I've done, I still can't get onions to grow very well. And so a lot of it is just learning your own climate and learning what works best for you. Because That is the biggest thing. I have done what the experts say to do on different crops, but because my environment and my growing conditions are different than what theirs are, it can make a big difference whether that method is going to work or not. So kind of my method is just to put things in the ground, experiment, and see what works. And that's kind of what I do. I know that I'm going to lose a lot of things, and so I try to plant enough to where the bugs can get them, the bunnies can get them, and then hopefully Josh and I can get some too. Quentin asks, how do you keep pests, insects, wildlife out of your garden? I'm having a problem with Japanese beetles and squirrels. And I don't actually have Japanese beetles or vine borers here. I watch a lot of YouTube, and a lot of gardeners struggle with that. Unfortunately, that's not something that I struggle with. I would recommend for that watching Rachel from that 1870s Homestead. She has quite a bit of stuff on vine borers, and Living Traditions has some really good videos on Japanese beetles and how to trap them. When it comes to little pests like squirrels, I don't put any fencing up. At the new house, we will have a deer fence and I will have a bunny fence. But right now, I kind of share. I share with the deer and I share with the squirrels and the bunnies, and I just have to be okay with that because I don't have any fencing up. The biggest pests that I deal with are aphids and slugs. And right now I don't have to deal with slugs so much because it's gotten so dry, but I do deal with aphids, and the best way I do that is with just some soapy water. I squirt soapy water on them, then I rinse them off, and that works really well. Denise asks, is this new home your forever home, and how much land is on the new property? And we plan for this home to be our forever home for a long time. We don't have any plans to move. It has all the things that we want on it, or it has the ability to do all the things we want on it. And the land is big enough. We're not saying the exact size of it just for privacy reasons, but it's certainly big enough to do anything and everything we want on it. This goes really well into Christine's question, and it's, do you want livestock on your property eventually? If so, what is a want/need animal between yourself and Josh? Milk cow, making cheese, question mark. And currently the only plans that we have to expand when it comes to animals of any kind on our property are bees. We are definitely doing bees next year. We don't have any plans to ever raise pigs. Josh and I buy 90% of my pork. I buy a whole hog from a local rancher, and I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to support him in that. And in my ideal dream world, I would love to have a milk cow, but I do all of this all on my own. I do the filming, the editing, all the background stuff. Everything is on me, and I do not have time to have a milk cow. And so some things would seriously have to change in order for that to be a reality for me. And I think that before we even consider that as a reality, because there is space, we could eventually do that if we want to. We would have to get a little creative because of the slope and everything. But I think that I do want to learn to make cheese. And just like when I lived in my suburban lot, I took that time to learn to buy local and to preserve food before I had a garden and learn to garden and grow my own food. I think it would be cool once I move and life settles down a little bit to take that time to learn to make cheese. I already know how to make butter, but I would really, really, really like to learn how to make hard cheeses. And so that is a goal of mine moving to this new house, is to take time to learn how to make cheese. And then maybe down the road in the future, we decide to get a milk cow, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. I'm really passionate about growing fruits and vegetables, and I'm totally okay buying my meat from local ranchers, and it is hard to find local raw dairy in my area. I can do it, I have to drive, and I just don't really have the time necessarily to drive to do that. But you can make hard cheeses with store-bought milk, and so that is something that I really, really want to learn to do, and we will learn that together. Chantel asks, what fruits and veggies would I never grow again? And it's the fruits and veggies I do not like to eat. That's definitely one thing I've learned, and that kind of goes in with Isabel's question, and what is the easiest thing to grow for newbies who do not have a green thumb? And no one has a green thumb starting out. We all have to grow our green thumb. I kill so much stuff all the time. The best gardeners kill the most amount of things because they've planted the most amount of things. Even if you've been gardening for 20 years, there's things that are out of your control, like weather and animals and all the things that can destroy your crops. But you're gonna never have the opportunity to do that. You're never gonna have the opportunity to kill a plant unless you plant a plant in the ground, and you just are gonna learn from that mistake or whatever it might be. And I would say the best thing to grow is something that you like to eat and something that you're excited about, because you're going to be more likely to take care of it. And the only way that we're going to be able to grow a green thumb is to have experience under our belt. And the more you plant, the more likely you are going to have a harvest. I try to plant more than I think I need because I know that I'm going to kill some things. I know that pests are going to get them. And so the best way to have the opportunity to harvest something is by planting something and getting that know-how and knowledge by having experience. Another question was, what is the easiest thing to grow for a newbie? And the thing I would say to start out with is the thing that you enjoy eating the most, because that's something you're going to be the most excited about growing. I have grown things that I don't even like eating, and you're not going to be excited and try to tend to that plant and check on that plant and baby that plant if you're growing tomatoes and you don't even like eating tomatoes. But if tomatoes are your absolute favorite thing, that's what you should be growing and spending time trying to grow, because you're going to be excited about it and you're going to be excited to tend to it. Tiffany asks, looking back from how far you've come, what would you say are the first things to start doing / getting started on a homestead if you live in the city or you rent? I think this is a fantastic question. The first thing you should do is learn to cook, because if you're going to be growing a bunch of your own fruits and vegetables one day, you're going to want to know how to cook those produce. And the second thing I would say is learn to buy local and learn to eat in season, because if you're going to eventually grow your own garden, at some points you're going to have tons of zucchini, tons of tomatoes, and different things are going to be coming in at different times. And knowing how to cook in season and not necessarily coming up with a menu plan and then going to the grocery store and buying those things, but learning what do I have in season and then creating a menu based on what you have is going to be really, really crucial. So before we moved onto our property, we lived in the city, and I became a member of a farm, community supported agriculture, and you basically get a share of produce once or twice a week, or once every other week, depending on how the CSA is set up. And you just get a basket of produce, and you don't really get to choose what's in that basket. And learning to cook with what I had in that basket is a skill. And that skill really helped me when my garden came in, because if you have a ton of zucchinis coming into the garden, you want to be cooking with those zucchinis, not with something else that's not in season that you're going to the store to buy because that's what you want to eat that night, if that makes sense. It is definitely a different way you have to think about cooking. And you can also learn food preservation skills. That's when I learned to can, was when I lived in my suburban city. I learned to buy bulk produce from farmers, and I learned to can and freeze. And that's a great skill you can do regardless of if you have your own garden or not. Victoria asks, I order all the seeds, but I get overwhelmed once everything is laid out in front of me. I then hesitate to plant. This year I'm growing beans, peas, lots of basil, tried zinnias, but no flowers. I guess my question is prioritizing with regards to the garden. And I think that goes back to the same answer that I had before, is just plant what you're the most excited about. If you're the most excited about flowers, then plant flowers. If you're the most excited about peas and carrots, plant peas and carrots. I think just learning that you don't have to do everything is okay, and just if all you want to grow in your garden is tomatoes, then that's okay. You don't have to grow all of the things. I don't grow all the things, and I am okay with not growing all the things. I don't think any of us can really grow all the things, you know. Nobody has the ability to be 100% self-sufficient when it comes to all fruits and vegetables, I don't think. I don't think most people who have huge homesteads necessarily are growing all the peanuts they need to then have peanut butter, or all the spices we need, whether we could or could. I mean, some things we can't even grow. You can't grow cinnamon here, and so that's something we're always going to buy. And so not feeling the pressure to have to grow all the things is to grow what you're excited about, and then either buy local what you don't grow, or buy the best quality you can buy, or whatever it might be, but just growing what you're passionate about, because then you're more likely to enjoy the process. This is supposed to be a fun thing we're doing. It's supposed to be something we're excited about, and the best way to keep excited and keep that momentum and keep that drive to continue on is to grow with what you're excited about. Jasmine asks, will you be adding any fruits, veggies to the new garden? Anything you're interested in trying for future harvests? And yes, we're going to be adding quite a few things. We are going to be putting in a vineyard, and both table grapes, like eating fresh grapes, and wine grapes. One of my goals eventually is to make some of my own wine. And we are going to be putting in a ton more fruit trees, and I want to put in some olive trees and some nut trees, and probably all the same vegetables I'm growing now. I just hope that I can probably grow more of them. I'm really hoping that peppers will grow better at the new place, because they don't grow super well in my backyard because of the lack of sun that gets back there. So that's kind of what I'm excited about. The vineyard is probably one of the biggest things that I'm really, really looking forward to. The preservation questions are next. Tracy asks, will I be participating in the Every Bit Counts challenge hosted by Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead? And I do plan to participate in preserving as much food as possible in the month of August. But her challenge is to preserve a little bit of food every single day, because that's what works best for her. And I am 100% on board behind that. But for me, the way I tend to do my food preservation are in big bulk batches. I take an entire day and I devote an entire day to a ton of canning, a ton of food preservation. And that works well for me because I don't have any kids. And I think that for her, because she has so many kids, it works better for her to do a little bit every day. And I think that just learning what works best for you is what is best for you. I think that her challenge is very motivating, and I'm going to take on her challenge in the fact that I'm going to keep that as motivation to continue to preserve as much as possible. But I just tend to do big batches as opposed to a little bit every day. Maybe once I have a little one running around, the Every Bit Counts challenge is the way that I'm going to need to do it, because I'm not going to have 4 hours or 5 hours or 6 hours or whatever it might be to devote to food preservation. And I think that's the beauty of this online community, is we can kind of watch and see how everyone does it, and then we can kind of adapt. We can get inspired by each other, but we can then adapt it to fit our life and what works best for us. Just like in Jessica's Pantry challenge that she hosts in January, her biggest thing is not that you need to follow her rules. Her biggest thing is make the rules that fit best for you. And I think her ultimate goal is to just motivate us to use up what we have in our pantries and to continue to fill our pantries. And every little bit counts. And I am totally on board, and I support that, and I'm excited to watch her, and I'm excited to fill my pantry, and it's just a really awesome thing. Pick Flowers asks, how do you go about buying a pig or half a cow of meat at a time? The best way to do that is to find local farmers and ranchers in your area. There is a website called localharvest.org, and you can type in your zip code, and it's going to give you a list of all the farms in your area. You can select and search for beef, cows, you pick produce, dairy, peaches. That's how I found the peach farm that I'm going to go peach picking at this summer, and that is the best way. The way it typically works is you put a deposit down on either half a pig, half a cow, whole hog. Once it is butchered, then you pay the butcher to process the meat. And so the best way to do that is just to find local growers in your area. And I'm super excited you're asking that question, because I think that is the best thing, is to get to know the farmers in your area. Because like I said earlier, none of us can do this all by ourselves. We can't do and grow and do everything. And so the best way to build a community is to find the local food producers in your area. Piper asks, what is the best place to start when it comes to food preservation? And my answer is, what do you already have in your pantry that you could preserve at home. Do you have a ton of tomatoes products in your house? That's what I started with. The very, very first thing that I ever canned were tomato products. Right now is a great time to find tomato farmers or just farmers that are growing tomatoes in your area. You call them and you ask them, hey, do you sell seconds? Seconds just means they're not the prettiest farm stand worthy tomato to sell. They might be funny shaped, they might be too soft, they might just have some little imperfection that makes them completely fine to eat, but they're not farmer market quality. And so those are the tomatoes you want to ask to buy to can with, because they're going to be blended up or cooked up or whatever it might be in a can or a jar, and you get them usually for about half the price that you would if you went straight to your farmer's market and bought the most pristine tomatoes to can. Those aren't the tomatoes you want to can, those are the tomatoes you want to put on a sandwich. And so that is where I would start. Do you have a bunch of jams and jellies? Do you eat a bunch of peanut butter and jelly? Then maybe starting with peanut butter and jelly would be the first thing to start with. I hope that makes sense. Or another thing that would be really good that I was really excited about and wanted to do for a long time, but it took me 5 years before I ever did it, was I always wanted to can my own beans and broth, because I would always make my own broth, but I would freeze it. And I would make a bunch of dried beans and cook them and freeze them. But if you're working with frozen products, then you have to thaw them before you use them. And I was scared to pressure can, and there's no reason to be scared. If you follow the directions, you're not going to explode the canner. There's too many safety mechanisms on them now. You're not going to do that, and you don't need to be worried about hurting your family. And I wish I had done that earlier, because pressure canning is super, super easy. It's so intimidating. I was so scared that I was going to kill myself or kill Josh or explode my house or whatever it might be. But once I did it, I realized I could do it, so you can do it. And so if you buy a lot of canned beans and you want to save some money by canning your own, that is a great thing to start with. So, and you can get a way better product. You can get really good bone broth that you can make homemade. You know all the ingredients that went into it. A lot of broths that you buy, you're paying for a lot of water and a lot of artificial flavors and colors to make it taste like broth, but it's not the way that broth was intended to be made a long time ago. And you will feel super, super empowered and super proud of yourself if you can up your own broth and you have that on your pantry shelf and you don't have to thaw it before you go to use it. Because that was the biggest thing, is I wasn't using my homemade broth very often because it was frozen and I would always forget to thaw it. So Blue asks, I'm a new canner and I want to can my recipe for salsa instead of a recipe in a bottle book. Can that be done? How do you know what changes can be made when changing a canning recipe? If you are a new canner, I would not recommend deviating from canning recipes. Canning is a science. It is not something that can be messed with. Like I said earlier, if you follow the directions, you are going to be okay. But if you deviate from the recipes, then you do have the potential to hurt yourself or hurt your family. Salsa is one of those recipes you can water bath can. Water bath canning is when you're canning very acidic foods, and the potential for botulism is basically zero, so you can water bath can that. But salsa has non-acidic items in it, like peppers and onions, and if you mess with that ratio of peppers and onions to tomatoes and the acidic agent that goes into it to make it safe, like either lemon juice or vinegar, you could potentially harm yourself or your family with botulism. Botulism is something that forms in a canned jar when you have a jar that's not acidic enough and you need to process something that's not acidic in a pressure canner, because botulism spores have to be killed at above boiling point, and so that's why you use a pressure canner for things like broths and beans and corn and green beans, because it's not an acidic environment and you need that food in that jar to get above boiling, and the only way to do that is in a pressured environment. So if you are making salsa and you want to water bath can it, you need to make sure that you have the proper ratios of non-acidic items, peppers and onions, to your acidic items, your lemon juice, vinegar, and tomatoes. So definitely as a new canner, do not deviate from recipes. Plot 10 Homestead asks, are you planning more freeze drying / food preservation videos in the near future? I enjoy your meal prep videos, But as we are entering harvest season, my mind is on stocking my pantry and avoiding food waste. Yes, all of the stuff that I plan to preserve this year, I will be taking you guys along the journey. Now, when I watch a lot of people that are growing food and doing a lot of things that live in the South, they are in much warmer environments than us. Tomatoes are already coming in, peppers are already coming in, but where I live, because we are a more temperate and cooler climate, it takes a little bit longer for things to get ready for harvest. So I probably am not going to be harvesting my first tomatoes, other than little cherry tomatoes, for probably 3 weeks, which is actually really good for me because we're moving next week. We're moving our stuff and ourselves. We're keeping the garden until the end of harvest season, but we are moving and hopefully being able to unpack before the huge harvests start to come in and before I start buying some bulk produce from local farmers in my area. So when all that stuff comes in, the fruit and the peppers and the onions and all those things, you will be brought along the entire journey. But the reason that I haven't started huge food preservation days yet is because the stuff just isn't quite coming in. We are getting little harvests here and there, enough to eat for dinner, salads and things of that nature, but the really, really big bulk harvests just aren't quite here yet. We usually don't get those till mid to late August and early September. Marie Peters asks, what do we need to start home food preservation? And that question really depends on what you want to preserve and how you want to preserve it. There's a lot of different ways you can preserve food. Freezing, canning, dehydrating, and freeze drying are kind of the most common ones. And if you're going to freeze stuff, I love having frozen corn in my freezer that I buy from local farmers because I can't grow corn. I'm going to try to grow corn next year, but this year it was an epic fail. And I like to freeze my corn, so the only thing you really need for that is a freezer bag and a freezer, and you can freeze corn. If you want to start canning, I would recommend you buy a pressure canner first. Even if you are intimidated to pressure can at first, like I was, you can water bath can in a pressure canner. So if you're gonna invest in something, I would go ahead and just invest in you can get a Presto pressure canner. They are the most affordable ones. You can use them on glass top stoves, and you can water bath can in it. So if you were already going to buy one, I would just go ahead and buy that, and you can, if you're more comfortable with water bath canning, you can learn that skill, and then you already have the equipment to then do pressure canning when you then feel comfortable to do pressure canning. If you want to do dehydrating, if you want to dry herbs and you want to dry tomatoes and all those types of things, then it would be good to get a dehydrator. But if you don't have to have a dehydrator, I know that it can be harder to dry herbs in humid climates, like Florida and Texas, I've heard have been, well, I think Texas can be humid. I think it depends on what part of Texas you're in, whether it's really dry or really humid. But I know that in humid climates, it can be harder to hang dry herbs because they can get moldy due to the humidity. And so if you want to do that and you do live in a humid climate, then maybe investing in a dehydrator would be good. And if you want to preserve entire meals, then probably a freeze dryer would be the place to go. So just looking at kind of like what your ultimate goal is when it comes to food preservation, and that's kind of where you would want to start. My number one goal when I started food preservation was I didn't want to buy tomatoes in tin cans anymore. I wanted to get away from that because tomatoes are very acidic, and even when you get the lined cans, they say that the acidity of the tomatoes can leach stuff out of the cans. I don't know if that's true or not, but that was my number one priority, and my number one goal was to not have to buy any tomato products in cans. And so I started with water bath canning. Okay, the next section of this Q&A is going to be cooking questions. Overall Adventure asks, any postpartum meal prep plans? I'm due in early November and would love to see what you're going to be cooking up. I absolutely do plan to do a bunch of breakfast, lunch, and dinner freezer meals for that time. I am due in December, early December, and so in November is probably when I'm going to be doing a bunch of those videos and meal preps. I don't know exactly what I'm going to be doing with that yet. Probably just depends. I probably will be trying to do entire meals, things that I don't have to make a bunch of sides where like the veggie and the protein and the starch are all in one. But I won't know that plan totally until we get there. But yes, there will be those food preps coming out at some point. Kelsey asks, what about food rules? Can you thaw meat and refreeze it? Can you freeze cooked meat? And I did do some research on this because I get this question all the time, is I thought you couldn't thaw meat, cook it, and refreeze it. And you can thaw meat, cook it, and refreeze it. The biggest thing is you want to make sure that the meat is not left at room temperature for more than 2 hours. So you need to cook the meat, cool it within 2 hours, and then you can freeze it and you're just fine. You can actually thaw, freeze, thaw, freeze, thaw, freeze multiple times. The most important thing is that you keep it only at room temperature for less than 2 hours. The reason you don't want to do that multiple times though is because the quality does go down a little bit. Wonder Gal asks, I've had bad experiences with glass in freezers. Have you ever had a bad experience with glass in freezers? And when you make your freezer meals in Pyrex dishes, how long do you have to wait before you put them in the oven from the freezer? I've been freezing in glass Pyrex for a long time and I've never had any issues with it. If I put something straight from the freezer into my oven, I put a cold pan into a cold oven and I preheat the oven and the Pyrex at the same time. I don't know if that is technically what you're supposed to do, but I do it all the time and I've never had an issue with it. I would never recommend putting a cold Pyrex dish with a meal in it straight into a hot oven. I definitely can see how that could cause some problems. Probably the most ideal thing to do would be to let your Pyrex and your food thaw completely in the refrigerator overnight before you put it into the oven. But I've never had any issues with that whatsoever. Jupiter asks, besides the unusual kitchen appliances, what is one kitchen gadget thing you would not want to live without? I think probably the most underrated kitchen appliance or gadget is a really good knife that is sharp and a really nice cutting board. That's probably the number one thing you use in your kitchen the most, or at least I do. And I think that having a dull knife can be so infuriating because you're using it for the most important and common thing you do in the kitchen is you have to cut and chop and dice. And to have a really sharp knife is going to make that experience in the kitchen so much more enjoyable. So can I encourage you, if you do not have a sharp knife, go invest and do yourself a favor because you use that probably the most out of anything in the kitchen. One last book asks, what is your experience with sourdough? Would you ever make a video on sourdough? I have tried sourdough 3 times and I cannot keep a sourdough starter alive. I don't know what it is. I don't know if my personality doesn't do well with it. I don't know if it's just one more thing to try to keep alive. I cannot seem to figure it out. And it's something that I eventually do want to try to figure out and do and master, but I know that right now is not the right time to try to do that. I do have a really good recipe for a crusty loaf of bread. I can link it down below if you're interested. And that's kind of my now go-to recipe if I want some crusty loaf of bread. It's super easy. There's nothing I have to keep alive. It does require yeast, but it's a very delicious loaf of bread and it's crusty. And so I'm not going to make any videos on sourdough at this point, but I would like to have that skill under my belt at some point. Martha asks, would I ever write a cookbook? And that is definitely one of my long-term goals. I really right now am focusing on getting the new website fixed and set up, or not fixed, but actually launched. Josh is a really good friend, has started working on it for us. Josh, he is a computer programmer and he was working on the new website, but clearly he's been doing remodel projects, and so that has had to take a back seat for him, and his friend is able to actually help us out, and I'm pretty excited about that. Yes, there will be a print button, so you will be able to print a recipe. So my ultimate goal right now is to make the website Scratch Pantry, where I do have all my current recipes on, to make it a more user-friendly and more beautiful and aesthetic platform to be on. Long term, I would love to make a cookbook. I just don't see that happening today or tomorrow, but it is one of my long-term goals, and I think it's super awesome that you would even ask that question and kind of be excited about it. So thank you, and we will see what the future holds when it comes to that. Elizabeth asks, when did you start learning to cook this way? Did you cook a lot when you lived at home? And I kind of talked about this a little bit, is when I was younger, we would go to the library and I would find recipes and we would cook recipes. But this is also kind of funny. I forgot about this till just now. I was in high school, I think. I must have been in high school because I was old enough to drive. And I talked my mom into paying me to go grocery shopping for her and to cook 3 meals a week for her. And I would plan the meals and I would go grocery shopping. I love grocery shopping. I always have loved grocery shopping. And so I thought that would be a super fun job. And I wrote out a whole thing, like a business proposal, and I did all the grocery shopping for her, and I cooked 3 meals a week, and I would go to the library and find recipes. And I don't even know how long I did that. I don't feel like I did it for that long, but that was something that I was able to talk my mom into letting me do, and I really enjoyed it. And then when I was in college, for a while, my sister lived at home, and her and I both loved to cook, and so we would take turns like finding random recipes online, and then we would cook dinner together, and that was really fun. Marilyn asks, would you try making dairy products like cheese and yogurt? And I already do know how to make yogurt. I just haven't made it in a long time, and I used to make all my own sour cream, and I'm giving myself a break right now, and I am not making sour cream. But yes, we've already talked about cheese. I definitely want to learn how to make cheese, and that is on my list probably for next year, is something that I really want to learn to do. I've actually purchased all the stuff I need in order to do it. I just haven't had the time to devote time to doing it. I have made mozzarella twice before, but I've never attempted a hard cheese. They seem super intimidating, and it's something that I do want to do, and I am excited about it. I just feel like I don't have the bandwidth to go ahead and dive into that right now. So I need a little bit more grace in my life in order to make that something that's going to be feasible to learn. Well, friends, we got through those questions. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed hanging out with you. That was super fun, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for the homestead and for us, and just growing this community. I greatly appreciate you all for taking time out of your day to spend time with me, and for taking the time to answer or ask a question. If I did not get to your question, I do apologize. I hope to do this again because I had a lot of fun. And if you guys want to kind of see what I have going on around here, the canning, the home renovation, the garden, and all that stuff, I can put a couple more videos right here you can go enjoy between now and my next upload. I hope you guys are having a fantastic day, and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye, friend.